one area we saw that no one would touch was the firearms industry. And we're like, well, this doesn't seem right. This is one of the only few constitutionally protected products. Why is it not being serviced by the financial industry? And that's led to now 8 years of quite an education going through that process.
Welcome to the LandTrust Podcast, where land, technology, and the outdoors meet. Whether you're a landowner, an outdoor enthusiast, or someone curious about the future of recreation on private land, you're in the right place. Each episode, we share real stories from the LandTrust community, from unforgettable guest experiences to conversations with landowners about their land and why they choose to share it, plus interviews with leaders, shaping how we all experience the outdoors. And now, here's your host, Nic De Castro.
Today, I'm joined by Dusty Wunderlich, a strategist and an economist operating at the frontier of FinTech and freedom-aligned commerce. Dusty currently serves as the Chief Strategy Officer at Public Square and previously led Credova, a FinTech company that transformed how consumers access financing in the firearms and outdoors space. He's a big thinker with a strong economic background, leaning into Austrian theory, anti-fragility, and the real-world financial innovation. This episode is part of our Outsides Insiders series, where we sit down with the founders, operators, and insiders shaping the future of the outdoor industry. I'm your host, Nic De Castro. I'm the founder of LandTrust.com. Just a quick reminder, our guests' opinions shared on this podcast are their own and may not reflect those of their companies or of LandTrust. In this episode, we're getting into fintech and payments for the outdoor and 2A industry, tariff dynamics, and what all this means for investors and operators trying to navigate the evolving economic landscape. I'm also fortunate to call Dusty a friend. Let's dive in. I appreciate you having, coming on here, Dusty.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. Always fun having conversations with you.
Yeah, so I guess we could kind of open our normal conversations that we have up, and that's kind of the idea of this whole podcast series is to kind of, again, bring out the conversations that people like yourself and myself are having, and our friends who are running and operating, businesses in kind of more of the hunt, fish space, but outdoor generally, and just, I guess give a little insider baseball to people who are interested in this stuff. So I guess to start, I obviously know you very well, but why don't you give the audience a quick understanding of how you work in the industry, your current role as the CSO at PSQ, but also you just recently announced a board seat at GrabAGun, and just kind of establish your bona fides for what we'll talk about. Yeah,
no, happy to, Nick. Yeah, I've kind of had an interesting path to the outdoor recreation space. And, I was born and raised in a small rural town in northeastern Nevada. The outdoors was in my blood. I grew up hunting, fishing, climbing mountains, and it's been a passion my entire life. And through some odd circumstances, I ended up in really global investment banking and working in the capital markets early in my career, and quickly realized I didn't really fit in there and had a very different worldview than most of the people that were around me. And that was a great learning area for me to really cut my teeth on how capital works globally and then also domestically as well. But ultimately, it drove me to want to be an entrepreneur and be more of a solution to the problems I was seeing. And this was about the time when the emergence of FinTech was really happening around 2008, 2009, during that Great Recession. Bitcoin was just coming online, peer-to-peer lending. And I was fascinated by this idea of this non-banking, non-financial institution way of approaching finance and capital. So I've spent the last 15 years of my career really building financial technology, been thinking and writing and speaking about it as well, much more from a contrarian position than typical, I would say, people in the space. So, but ultimately it's how I ended up in the outdoors was we were launching a new company and we wanted to create a new consumer lending product. Specifically with the emergence of what we were seeing with e-commerce, we wanted to be able to offer point of sale financing through e-commerce, which other players were doing like Affirm and Klarna, but it was still very early. And we were naturally drawn to areas where we loved and were passionate about, and that was the great outdoors. And one area we saw that no one would touch was the firearms industry. And we're like, well, this doesn't seem right. This is one of the only few constitutionally protected products. Like, why is it not being serviced by the financial industry? And that's led to now 8 years of quite an education going through that process. But through that, I've been able to, we were able to build Credova, stand it up with a lot of pushback, both from political, media, you name it, but just fell in love with the industry, fell in love with taking the knowledge of finance and applying it to the industry, which I think is a little bit behind because it's been cut off basically from traditional financial institutions. But it's just fun working with people like yourself, Nick, and others in the industry that we just come from the same worldview. We're passionate about the outdoors, but also just have a alignment worldview typically outside of that as well. And I think that's where you and I have connected a lot as well. So as we built out Credova, we thought it might be a company who'd hold forever. So who wants to buy a finance company that finances firearms? So, but we were watching this emerge, this concept of a parallel economy, and Public Square being one of the leaders in that, Rumble, Truth Social, some of these others, and was just fascinated by what we were seeing, and was put in touch through some mutual friends, Michael Seifert, who is the CEO of Public Square. And as we started talking, I was like, look, you're going to have to get payments correct because that's where they're going to come after you. That's where you're going to attack this new parallel economy. So we really hit it off. And, 6-7 months later, we ended an acquisition with them. We realized our demographic, our TAM was highly aligned. It was strategic. And so we're a year into that acquisition now. I moved into the chief strategy officer role and helping Public Square grow that company and the broader parallel economy. That's led to other opportunities, like you said. GrabAGun is a big customer of Credova's. They're being taken public by Colombier, which is led by Omid Malik, who I sat on the board of Public Square. And just very proud to be a part of a group that's actually taking a firearm company, a great technology firearm company, to the public markets, which I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. So,
very different. Very different times than, a few years ago where you're having firearms companies being shut down and sued. And so it's interesting to see. It's refreshing to see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that, cool. That kind of ties into where I'm at today.
Yeah. So obviously, again, establishing the bona fides, you've been basically an innovator in this space. And you've been joined by some other people who had been working a lot heavily in the fintech space with Brian over there, with his past experience at Klarna. So I would say you guys are very well qualified to talk about some of the stuff we'll get into. So why don't we talk about fintech in the outdoor space? And when we say outdoors, I think for this podcast, we're talking about hunting a lot, hunting and 2A. Anything that touches firearms, the outdoors, when Silicon Valley talks about it, it's like, hiking in a Patagonia vest. No one's worried about that. It's a big industry. They're well taken care of. We really focus on kind of the hook and bullet, I would say here, and more bullet than anything. Yeah. And, just to clarify for those who are listening, when we say outdoors. So having said that, I've talked to, as part of the series, some other folks, maybe more on the marketing and advertising side, all the challenges that we face if there are dead animals involved. So like advertising on Meta's platforms or in Google, really, really difficult, impossible. It's getting a little bit better potentially, but the challenges that we face in this space because there are firearms, or even 2 years ago was crazy, like a knife or a broadhead, you couldn't advertise it online. It's getting a little better there, but we talk about fintech. What are some of the things that have happened historically to companies? Debanking or anything like that, and then kind of as Credova, and now you're a part of PSQ. What are those challenges, and how are we handling them?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I would say the financial system is certainly used as one of the primary weapons of the government, especially when the legal argument is not there. And 2A in particular is in our industry is ripe for that type of abuse because they can't stand on legal precedent. So what the trend has been, at least for the last, I'd say 15 to 20 years, has been using the financial system and weaponizing the financial system. And we really saw this come forth first in the Obama administration. And that was what some people may have heard of the Operation Choke Point. And this was really the FDIC, the OCC, the regulatory bodies were putting pressure on banks to not work with certain industries. And in 2013, 2014 era, that was firearms. They also did payday lending. Oil and gas got wrapped up into that as well. So it was very quiet. This was a new maneuver, really, at this scale, anyways, that the industry had seen. So you had even large manufacturers that were losing lines of credit after being good customers for 10 to 15 years that had no issues with their balance sheet. So this was really phase one of that weaponization. I think it really curtailed really strongly with a strong media push as well. And this is what I've seen from my seat and I've experienced firsthand is these two things work hand in hand. And it's not just hyperbole to say that media and government are in bed, like it literally is true. And I've lived it firsthand. And so this is where you get the media really pushing this narrative. And then, the banking system coming in, deplatforming, debanking, things of that nature. And that's really where you get that public sentiment up. They get scapegoated. And that's really what we've seen the industry go through. There's been a second choke point that happened during the Biden administration, which we saw some of that as well. We had two bank partners that effectively were pushed out of being partners with us for no real good reason, but also hit the crypto industry as well, which I think, the Second Amendment industry, our industry, the outdoor industry has been very open to crypto because of being basically blackballed from traditional payment rails in traditional banking as well. So this is just where you're seeing this consistent way. I mean, similar to marketing and advertising, where they're just trying to shut down access to capital markets, to advertising platforms, to technology platforms. And that's how they have really fought this. And this is why, at the end of the day, to me, this is more of a cultural war than anything, because we have to get the culture on our side, which it's been so against us for so many years because of the media. I think we saw that break. Thank God for the podcasters. And we're starting to see, culture change because they're getting real information now and from sources that aren't coordinating with our government. So look, I think that our industry has been suppressed. I always say, I think the industry should be 5 to 6 times the size it is on the hook and bullet size because of capital suppression. If you just look at, just generally the balance sheets of a lot of the companies we're dealing with and the capital they would have to grow that they don't. Now, I think that's changing and it's going to change in a big way. But that's effectively what the industry has done with. They have been cut off from not even just normal banking services, but any of the capital markets for, the last 20 to 30 years.
Yeah. I've experienced it. We're not a two-way company per se, but, we facilitate hunting, and that's one of the core activities that we do. And I have funny stories about fundraising for LandTrust over the years on the coasts and in the valley, and some of the things that have happened there. Just because, really, if you boil it down, it comes down to there's firearms and there's dead animals, and we've certainly experienced that. I think it's a really interesting observation that because the capital markets haven't been readily accessible, whether through lending or venture, the industry is probably artificially smaller than it should be, really, which makes sense. If you're operating in other categories and those, financial vehicles are there, tools are there for you to do, like it enables growth and innovation, et cetera. So I hadn't thought about that from that perspective before. All right. So why don't we talk about kind of the topic du jour, which is tariffs. I'm reading, and just for everyone's background, Dusty's very libertarian, Austrian economics, writes for Mises. So he's very contrarian to a lot of perspectives, which I actually really appreciate. But in the general outdoor, the Patagonia space, the REI space, obviously the gear manufacturers are all freaking out over tariffs. I vacillate between, okay, well, let's make more stuff in America. Obviously, that doesn't get flipped on overnight, and it's going to take time. And there are some hard things to get through with that. But what are you seeing more in our space specifically? And, how are you kind of perceiving tariffs for the hook and bullet, kind of the hunt fish, two-way space?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel for any entrepreneur that is producing a product that has any type of manufacturing overseas. This is going to be a very difficult time. It's existential, really, and it's what's occurring. One thing I'd like to do, Nick, is just kind of give some context here, because I think that like so much in politics right now, we've just lost any semblance of nuance and why we are where we are. We love to make things highly binary and try to take very complex issues and make them very simple. Right now the narrative is, globalism bad, nationalism good. We should make goods in America. And look, I think most Americans would agree with that, but it's not it's not really recognizing that the United States put itself in this position, 50 years ago. There's a concept in economics called Triffin's dilemma, which he was an economist in the 60s. And he was really predicting that this would happen if we came off the Bretton Woods gold standard and really became the world's global reserve currency. And he was like, if you're going to be a national fiat currency and then the global reserve currency, the only way you can really sustain that is that you have to go into massive trade deficits in order to get dollars out to the rest of the world in order to transact in those dollars. So this is by design how the system worked. And when we came off the gold standard, became the global reserve, we effectively were putting ourselves on that course. Now, the dilemma is that if you're continuing to run bigger and bigger deficits, you're going to destroy your currency long term, and you're going to drive down your national economy, which is exactly where we are. And we've been doing this for 50 years now. 60% of the money supply has been printed since 2008, 30% since 2020. What we're seeing, and outside of what is happening with Trump, there's a bigger global macroeconomic trend here, that this is the de-dollarization of the world that is occurring right now. And now, as we've sent out trillions of dollars overseas to get imports in, what has that money done? That money's then come right back into the United States, into our assets. A lot of it's come into land, which affects you primarily. So we've seen massive asset bubbles because the smart money knows, like, this is inflationary. We've lost 90% of the dollars since 1970, when we came off the gold standard. So they're looking for commodities, they're looking for land, they're looking for timber, they're looking at all of this. And since then, we've had all this foreign money pour in. So we're really reaping what we've sowed, and it's going to break one way or the other. I think what Trump's doing is, without a doubt, going to break the dollar and break the dollar as a U.S. reserve currency. Now, the thing I disagree with, if he's doing that and that's his purpose, then good on him. It should be destroyed, in my opinion. And we cannot sustain this. But if not, we're just creating complete supply chain chaos on top of weakening our position from a financial structure. So this is kind of where my concern comes. But to the audience, what I would say is, like, as Americans, we like things fair, right? We're based on justice, we're rule of law. And when you hear the argument that, well, the tariffs are unfair, that is just total BS. Tariffs are being paid nominally. We are inflating our currency well beyond any type of tariff cost to us. So that is the bad argument to look at. This is just a structural problem the United States is facing, and I think Trump is putting a stake in the ground. But it is going to create a lot of chaos. Now, to bring this full circle, I think the other macro trend here, Nick, and you and I have talked about this, is, and we've seen this already happening. We've seen it public square. I know you've seen it. Consumerism is dying, and it's on its last leg. People are looking for experiences. They're looking for scarcity. They're looking for quality. My argument is this was already happening. The market was already doing this. So companies like LandTrust, like yourself, that are creating unique experiences, companies like GuideFitter, our friend Brian, that are creating community around, fragmented groups of people like, outfitters and guides. To me, that is the future of this space. Products are going to go through a big, I think, reset. And I think a lot of them are probably going to go out of business. Out of that will probably come new innovation. I think quality is going to go way up. I think, long-term, people are going to think a lot less more about spending money on product and a lot more about experience and community. So those are kind of some of the trends that I'm seeing with tariffs and kind of my thoughts of where we sit. And it's going to be a rocky road.
Yeah. I mean, we have another mutual friend, John Edwards, who's running Schnee's there in Bozeman and also is a kind of partner investor in Duckworth. And I know both companies were making, I think Duckworth is still 100% grown, made, sewn, everything in the US. But I know firsthand, and I'll have John on the podcast too to talk about kind of the Made in America challenge, because it is a challenge. And guys like Origin are out there and they've been really good at documenting. And I think they've done a great job just kind of like telling the story of the challenges it is to bring back manufacturing for the stuff that they're making. The consumerization thing. Yeah, I'm of the mind that, my wife shops at Target and every day she brings home, little Chinese plastic trinkets for my 3 daughters. And I'm just, like, why are we doing this? But it's just what we've been geared towards. And I hope that this strategy leads us to a place where it's less consumption. Taxes are taxes and disincentive. Right. So when you use the word disincentive instead of tax, it's a really interesting conversation, like income disincentive. Like that doesn't make sense to me. Wealth disincentive, property disincentive, so that stuff doesn't make sense. But a sales tax does, like a consumption disincentive. So like we shouldn't just sit and rampantly consume, at least in my perspective. I feel like it's almost a moral perspective. So I'm hoping that when we see this push to reshore, again, we're not going to reshore everything. And, in some of our text message conversations, like, there are certain things that certain countries have it's artisan, it's craftsman. Like I love watches. Unfortunately, I have daughters, so I can't afford watches anymore. But yeah, I want to buy a watch from Schaffhausen or Geneva, right? I want to buy a Swiss watch because they've been doing it for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're the best in the world at it. So I still think specialization from a trade perspective has a place, but just to produce a bunch of cheap plastic shit, frankly, that goes into a landfill. Like I joke that we just launder plastic from China to put to our landfills. And like, I don't think that's good. And so, how much of the outdoor space is that? Like, again, gear, I think is a little bit less so because gear really has a function. So you're buying this piece of gear because it has a unique function. And ideally, you're buying quality gear that does last. And I think the people who are going to make better and better quality gear, and ideally it is, a lot of it is made here. Boots are interesting because Italy, Schnee's and a lot of the boot makers, the Italians have been making boots and shoes for, again, I don't know, thousands of years, really. So they do have that expertise there. But I do think a lot of the stuff that is being made that doesn't have that kind of like hundreds of years of lineage should be made here, ideally. And yeah, we're going to pay more for it because we're paying people living wages. We're not paying them slave wages. And it will lead to less consumption rampantly. At least that's what, in an ideal world should happen, really.
You're getting at the heart of, my economic theory, Nick. And I'll tell you what has driven consumerism. And I don't blame consumers for it. I mean, in a way, you can't say we are a part of the matrix, right? And everything in my economic theory is about money supply. And this is why I'm a commodity money guy. This is why I'm a huge fan of gold standards or cryptocurrency or some sort of monetary discipline. And this is where I've always, even from the left, and the ones that are really worried about the planet, we should agree on this issue, because what happens is when you print money and you increase that money supply, you're sending to the world this idea of abundance and not scarcity. And what that does is, when you have that sense of abundance, you are going to misallocate resources because it's a false sense of abundance, because it's not based on reality. So we, over the last 50 years, have thought we've had all this abundance. We've went and made things that are completely pointless. We've misallocated resources. We've seen that. I mean, the venture capital community, I'm going to pick on them. I mean, there's nothing greater than looking at the nonsense that they've created in the last 20 to 30 years that, should have been used to really focus on solving bigger, real problems. So this is, to me, at the end of the day, everything is rooted in fixing the money supply. That fixes consumption. It fixes how we allocate resources. And look, man, reality is scarcity. We live in a world that has scarce resources, and we can sit there and trick ourselves all day long that's not true. But eventually, we're gonna reap the benefits of that, which we're seeing right now. The last point I would make is, I put that post on LinkedIn recently about we can't get into this binary nationalism good, globalism bad. Division of labor is a beautiful thing. It's what's made this world more rich. And there are parts of the world and people that just have expertise in what they do. Like, I'm sorry, I want to go get my boots from Italy. They make amazing boots. And there's nothing wrong with that. I want my beef from America, Montana, or Texas. I don't want it from Brazil.
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
There's nothing wrong with that. And again, all of this stuff fixes itself if we are basing it in reality, which is real money. And I hate to be oversimplify because these are complex issues, but this is one that I think is at the root cause of sound money fixes most of these issues that we're talking about. And it will fix the outdoor industry as well.
So you mentioned crypto a couple times. A sad story of mine. I remember learning about Bitcoin in like 2010 at my first startup job, and the VP of sales there was like buying Bitcoin. I think it was like pennies. I don't know. It was $1 or something. I read about it. I'm like, I have no idea what the hell I'm reading. I don't consider myself a dumb guy, but I couldn't wrap my head around it. I was also 21 years old. So that's my sad story. But what do you think? I mean, what do you think crypto from a 2A, from financing, like the payments rails, all that stuff that you kind of work on and look at every day? Is crypto a real thing for firearms and kind of the hook and bullet space and a financing perspective, or is it still far off? Because it's not crypto still isn't mainstream. I feel like, yes, people are, betting on Bitcoin and some of these other things, but transaction wise, I don't know that I know anybody that buys anything with crypto, like they're just trading it essentially.
It's a great question. And I think that what was innovative about Bitcoin, there's a lot of reasons for it, from a privacy, a financial discipline, with limiting supply. But to me, what was really foundational is that you were combining a currency with payment rail together. Usually those have been separate, which creates an incredible amount of efficiency in our financial system. So, you can go and move, Bitcoin, Ethereum, any of these for, pennies, and you can do it in some cases on the Lightning Network in seconds, So at the end of the day, it is from a technology perspective, it's going to break the payment rail monopoly that has been built on top of the banking system in the United States, that Visa and MasterCard and Discover have had complete and total control over, which, as you know, as an entrepreneur, what you're paying per transaction versus how you could move money with cryptocurrency. So I'd say what I tell everyone is, I mean, we're what now, almost 15 years into this. This has all been about building the bones of, what I think is really the next currency for the fourth industrial revolution is cryptocurrency. And so you've had developers in there building the plumbing, and anyone who's worked in payments, like building plumbing and payments is highly complex, highly difficult. I think we're getting there close to where that technology can now start getting with product and business people that can go and create user experiences that are approachable. And I think that's kind of the next phase I'm hoping we'll go into in the next 20 years. But primarily, what's most important about it, in my opinion, is it's free market, right? We should, as consumers, be able to choose what currencies we want to use. Now, this is an existential threat to the state, because if they don't have control of currency, how can I use coercion in order to make you pay your taxes, right? So this is the fight that we're in right now. But like anything in the free market, we as consumers should be choosing what is the best. We've seen time and time again that the consumers know best. And so having this level of, there's 2,000-3,000 cryptocurrencies out there right now. We've never seen this in human history, to see that level of competition, that many ideas around currency. So, I'm just couldn't be more excited about what this is going to entail. I think it'll be transformational to our industries that have been mistreated, because we're going to be the first adopters. And I think that we will be rewarded for that in a big way.
So yeah, I totally agree that we'll be first adopters, and it's always the marginalized that are going to take these new technologies and put them to work first. But do you think it's realistic that we've got average Joe buying a gun online with crypto in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think in the next 5 years. We'll start to see that, especially with stable coins and the bill that's running through Congress right now for stablecoin, the Trump administration. I definitely think that we will see that in the next 5 years.
Yeah, and I think the reason, again, for folks who might be in the investor community listening to this who aren't close to it, the reason it's important as a consumer is because large banks like Bank of America were caught looking through transactions and looking for transactions for firearms, and I think ammunition too, but firearms definitely, and flagging them and sending them to the government. And so, as somebody who values my freedom and my freedom to consume, my freedom to buy something that is constitutionally protected, I don't want that kind of thing happening. So if there were a way to transact, so cash is, ideally you pay in cash. You're still filling out NICS forms and stuff like that. So it's not like a totally paperless transaction. But, if it's like, hey, you can use this crypto to buy this thing and it's not going to, be analyzed through Bank of America or whatever, whatever banking institution you have. At least as a layman consumer, that would be very interesting to me. So that's why it's a concern,
Yeah, and look, this is the heart of the culture war again, right? A lot of Americans that are doing transactions, they're not doing anything nefarious. The media is going to tell you that. The regulators are going to tell you that. They just value privacy. That's a very American trait, to value your privacy, And look, trust in the banking system is the lowest it's ever been. It's similar to where Congress is at as well. They've given us zero reason to trust them. So to your point, Nick, like getting off the traditional payment rails, and as you see more states going both directions, you're seeing states that are saying MCC codes need to be tracked, like California and New York, for firearm purchases, which is one step away from a national gun registry, which is unconstitutional. Yes. So again, trying to use the financial system to bypass the legal system. This continues to sow the distrust that will eventually, I think, break the dollar and break the banking system. And the 2A community is so near and dear to me, because I literally believe that community has had more backbone than any community in the world, and has, stood by principles and pushed back against tyranny in such a profound way, right? So I think them leading this, the outdoor industry, the hunters, the gun owners, all of these leading this charge, they really truly will, in my opinion, be the first adopters that will really put this in the mainstream, because they have the backbone to stay by the principles.
All right, I'm going to take a quick little break from that conversation we're having to do this week's Field Notes update. This Field Note update is coming from Cold River Cattle Company, one of the LandTrust properties that's in Stowe, Maine. And this is a really cool one. We've got a sportsman who was out there turkey hunting, and he actually got to bag 2 turkeys, one in New Hampshire and one in Maine. So he got 2 birds and knocked out 2 states. And if you haven't checked out Field Notes yet, it's a really great place where landowners post updates from their properties that they have listed on LandTrust. So those updates could be for game camera photos, or videos, 5-star reviews like this with photos from the sportsmen, weather updates, whether they're going out and harvesting, anything like that. So it's basically your personalized scouting feed to follow along with properties all over the country. We have 1.4 million acres that you can follow along with. And it's also a great feed where you're going to see things that you probably won't see a lot on some of the other platforms. So yes, we do show dead animals and we show firearms and things like that. And some of these other platforms, they have historically been kind of not super in favor of that, but we are true to the sport. We are hunters ourselves and fishermen. So we proudly show all those things. So it's a fun feed to scroll through. You can share these things very easily with your friends. There's little share buttons under each of the posts. And if you see things that you're really interested in, you can just contact those landowners directly from the feed. If that turkey hunt that was shared in New Hampshire and Maine was interesting, you can contact the landowner directly from that field note post, and you will get in talk with that landowner to potentially book a trip for yourself next year. So if you haven't checked it out, field notes, and it's at landtrust.com/field notes. You can follow any property on LandTrust and you will get alerted when landowners post new updates about their properties. All right, let's get back to the show.
Okay, so we talked about a few of those things. Like, where do you see, what is the next 5-10 years? I have obviously a thesis that I've shared, and I think in kind of the digital outdoor economy, again, outdoors skewing much more hook and bullet. I think there's going to be consolidation. I think there's a large opportunity for the next $1 billion+ company to come from, the old $1 billion outcomes in our space were manufacturing oriented. So, the Vistas of the world would go and, GSM and Pradco and a bunch of these guys would go just roll up a bunch of manufactured goods and retail and all that stuff. I think it's going to be, digital companies that are working in this space that work together and can really have a unified customer profile and basically touch these sportsmen and women at each stage of the journey. Because if you look at the outdoors and you boil it down, the outdoors is just about going on trips. That's what we think it. So we plan in trips, and we might use maps for trips. We might go buy gear for trips. We might, ideally you could go and finance trips, generally speaking, and insure them and build loyalty for that. So, it's all about trips. So you guys, you just, again, have kind of announced joining a board of a large you categorize them into e-commerce platform, right? GrabAGun. So I don't know, like, where do you see e-commerce going? What do you think about this digital ecosystem? And what do you think the next 5 years are going to be? Because it's an interesting shift. 2-3 years ago, the idea that, a firearms retailer going public would be pretty wild. But like now here we are. So there is that, like, this kind of shift in the vibe.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think that you nailed it, that you got to look at products separately than the rest of the industry, which, at the end of the day, I think 80% of the TAM is actually travel oriented. So
70-80% is trips and travel. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just blue ocean still. It hasn't been tapped into. I think this next 5 years, you're going to see considerable consolidation in the product space. It has to for survival. So I think you're going to see that. I think you'll see some really new, interesting new innovation out of just high quality products come out of there with more of, boutique type of products that we're seeing pop up. We're already seeing that too a little bit. I think that will be kind of the new emerging innovation in product, but all the big players, especially with most of their manufacturing sourced overseas, consolidation is going to be the key there in order to really survive. So to your point, I mean, platforms in digital technology, in my opinion, are the future. It's what you were doing at LandTrust, what Brian was doing at Guidefitter. I've always really appreciated what you guys are doing, because you're taking this highly fragmented community and figuring out how to consolidate that experience and community through a technology and in a platform. You a lot with landowners and with consumers, and then Brian, of course, with the outfitters and products, and also some trips is layered in there as well. So to me, that's going to be the future. And I think you can look across a lot of industries and see that is going to be the future of how do you create community and platforms where you can offer all of these things in one place, right? And
Yeah.
trips are difficult, right? And so being able to crack that nut of like, how do we make this process? We've all gone on outfitted hunts and trips, like they're still very archaic to go through. So to me, that is the multi-billion-dollar opportunity in this space, and I think you guys are positioned perfectly for it.
With consolidation, again, we've seen it in the manufacturing side. So there's private equity roll-ups and that kind of stuff. Some of the complaints are, some of the beloved brands that have been acquired and rolled up, then I don't know, lose their soul. Is probably the best way to put it. Everyone freaked out when Yeti bought Mystery Ranch, and they're probably going to, it's just like it's a playbook, right? I'm wondering, and I don't know the answer to this yet. So, that usual playbook is like streamline, back office stuff, and decrease costs on manufacturing, meaning AKA send it to China or whatever else. So the product quality gets lesser. It loses that like hardcore heart and soul that built these companies. And I can name names, like there's brands like Stone Glacier, which is a very beloved company. They're in Bozeman, and I used to live basically right across the street from those guys. And that was a hardcore community of people who loved those packs, or made here in the U.S. But yeah, they get acquired, and I know firsthand that the soul is being ripped out of it. And I'm sorry for saying it, but it's just true. We all know it. That's what these conversations are supposed to be about, is insider baseball. So I'm curious. I'm heartened to see, like, okay, if it's a digital product, something like what Brian's building, maps, whatever, you can't really decrease quality of product because you're, trying to reduce COGS, right? So it's not like we're going to ship our, software engineering to China or whatever, right? It doesn't really matter. So I'm wondering if there's any other things that should be or could be concerning about consolidation on the digital front, whether it's e-com or, stuff that we're building. Obviously, manufacturing, you lose quality, you could lose some heart and soul, some of that stuff. Like, I wonder if there are things we should be concerned about on the digital side. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, look, I think going back to money supply, consolidation is definitely another one of those symptoms of excess resources. It's in cheap interest rates. I mean, we've seen massive consolidation over the last 30 to 40 years. If we fix money supply, fix interest rates, it's harder to go and make acquisitions when there isn't capital in the market, or you've got actual real interest rates that won't allow you to be able to pencil it based on the cash flow of that company. So I think the consolidation, in a way, was two-handed. One, there was companies that were getting started with products that probably should have never gone to market and succeeded, but cheap capital, low interest rates allowed that to happen, and then eventually they have to consolidate to do that. So although I do think there's still going to be a consolidation, I think that will eventually be less of what we see in the financial system if we fix how we deal with money. And if fiat is going away, that should naturally start to change. And look, for guys like, in the Stone Glacier is such a great example. I mean, I love their products, use almost every one of their products, and seeing that happen. But again, that's another example of someone who probably had a hard time accessing the capital markets, probably didn't have much of a choice at the time. So I'm hopeful a lot of this is self-correcting. And so from your perspective, like, if we fix that, we should be able to start seeing companies that could last multi-generations potentially, right? Within families, like we used to see in America. So I think this all ties back again to what is our financial system, what's incentivizing it. And if we get good hard money again, fix interest rates to where they should be, we should see less consolidation, and we should see less desire for consolidation as well with entrepreneurs. It's like, hey, I've got a great cash flow business. I've got a good line of credit to grow it. I've got, good investors. Like, I don't need to go sell this company. I love what I'm doing, And I bet a lot of our friends that in the industry that have had to sell, had they had access to that, they probably wouldn't have. So I think for you guys, hopefully you don't feel as pressured to do an exit.
Certainly. And yeah, I mean, those are real things. And it's like, the banking system or some financial institutions that are going to be out there willing to finance businesses in this space. whether through, again, kind of debt or equity, is going to be important. And if people are doing that, we should make them known so that they can, so that entrepreneurs can go connect with them. Because, look, I was in Bozeman, and you go talk to a local bank, they're like, what kind of assets you got? Like, I don't know, laptop, so it's just like, it wasn't something that they were going to go do. And I'm sure, Stone Glacier was, local company. I'm sure they bank locally too. And so, we need to find kind of that financial infrastructure that is there to support and grow these things. I think it's going to be really important. So awesome, man. Well, any other contrarian perspectives you have about the industry right now?
Well, you and I, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about private land a little bit here. So
yeah, I know. I think private land. You're sitting in Bozeman. I moved recently, so I moved to Fairhope, Alabama. So I'm now a Southerner. I'm a hopefully adopted Southerner. It's been really interesting to see. I built a private lands company in probably the least friendly state and city. Missoula would probably have been worse, but Bozeman, Montana is a notoriously hardcore public lands center. Public lands are awesome. I always have to say it. It's like silly that I have to caveat. Like, I love public lands. They're great. They're a great resource. I use them all the time. But the matter of fact is, like, 70% of the lower 48 is private. And if you want to figure out hunting and fishing and outdoor access, you need to figure out private land. And to figure out private land, because it's private and privately owned and paid for, like, you have to have a private market model for it. And so, to me, now that I live in a way more private land-oriented state, it's really interesting to see the kind of, like, culturally how it's reacted to.
Yeah. No, I mean, how big a fan I am. I mean, it's what connected us to begin with, is having come from Nevada to
the most
Montana.
Public. Well, Alaska is the most public land, I think, percentage wise, like 96, 97, but Nevada's up there.
Number 2, I think. Yeah. They're like 80%. And so I got to see the stark differences, even in my own lifetime, of having that access to public land. And same to you, I love public land. I primarily hunt public land. I love to hunt in the mountains. So I'm not against it, but I also know the economic realities of what is produced by that. And it went from when I was growing up in Nevada, I'd draw a tag every year, to now I have friends that are residents that maybe draw a tag every 6 years. And this is the tragedy of the commons, right? That we've talked about. And it's just, without some type of ownership, the resources is going to get misused. And we saw that starkly in Nevada. And then you also have a system that wants, the Department of Wildlife that want revenue, that are pressured to get revenue. So you have these incentive structures that are just misaligned, that cause just, it ends up with a scarcity of animals. And when I saw what you're doing, I loved it, because it gave that access. And you're doing it. I think a lot of people miss the point of LandTrust, that this is affordable. Like your AOV is what, $1,000, I mean, this is giving affordable land access to people. And what I've seen being up here in Montana, and I've made friends with some multi-generational ranchers. I've had the, honor and privilege to be able to go hunt on some of their ranches, and watching them steward those resources is just awesome. That has been passed down over generations. They know how not to pressure elk, to push them off land, and how to, plant the right crops for them. Like, it's just incredible watching that knowledge. And for that reason, I get to go hunt public land, and there's still animals there, which I couldn't do in Nevada, So I tell this to people a lot here in Bozeman, and it definitely gets them thinking. But again, this is such a binary issue in this community. And you've done a great job, I think, putting it. Perk as well does a great job with it.
Very good.
They're here in Bozeman. They've been amazing. So I'm hoping that issue, you continue to, lead as a thought leader on that, and we can soften some of the people on the importance of private lands.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I just had another guest on, Matt from Base Maps, but we talked about the issues that hunting specifically has. You kind of touched on a little bit with licensing and tags and lotteries and all this stuff. But, for the non-hunters out there in the technology community, like, we have to work with 50 separate walled gardens, meaning the states. So hunting is regulated at the state level. So every state has their own regulations, but then they produce their regulations and put them on websites or PDFs or however else they do it. They have their own, homegrown or white labeled licensing platforms where you go and actually buy them. And, the idea of the hunt space needing open source, we need to get rid of 50 walled gardens. We need to get people like, hey, this is, even as something as simple as like saying a zone. Well, it depends on what state you're in. Is it a zone? Is it a unit? Is it a game management? Is it a hunt district? No, it's a geographic region in which we're managing the species and like the hunting of them. So, when you look in the kind of the OTA space, the online travel agency space, they standardize things like what a unit of lodging is and, these things. And we need to do that in the space in order to be able to innovate faster, because right now it's just like, yeah, you have to go deal with 50 walled gardens, all of their own things. Everyone's trying to like aggregate data. It's getting easier now with ChatGPT and, kind of AI, but it's still a lot to be desired in this space for hunting specifically. It's kind of a moat right now if you can kind of get it figured out, but you really shouldn't build your moat on that kind of data aggregation. It's sort of a commodity. So I'm hoping that we see more innovation kind of across states. It would be cool to see like U.S. Fish and Wildlife or like a federal agency say, hey, we should probably all get on the same, licensing terminology and all this stuff so that we can all understand what each other are doing and make tag applications and purchasing licenses and discovering units and all that stuff easier,
Gosh, such a good point. It reminds me similar to the open banking concept and just having open APIs into different banks, which Europe did a long time ago. We're still struggling to do, just so we can have continuity of access to the banking system, right? Mm-hmm. As fintechs, that's a big deal to be able to go in and say, hey, I need to look at your bank account to approve you for a loan or not, something of that nature. And but you're right, it's just it is a mess of jargon and lack of definitions. And you're exactly right. I mean, I would love to see, that's an opportunity, right, for the free market to come in and start putting their foot forward of like, how do we get a solution all of you guys can get on, or even just getting APIs to where we can centralize it all into one system, right? I love that idea. And I mean, I just love that people are thinking about those things in our industry.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. I appreciate you coming on and sharing a bunch of knowledge. This is the financial industry and the rails and all the stuff behind it can be a bit esoteric. And I certainly don't pretend to understand all of it. So it's always fun to have these conversations and, kind of illuminate, again, the whole point of this specific series is to share kind of like the insider stuff that we all talk about. And, ideally, if more people are aware of these things and understand them better, again, from a financial perspective, investors, private equity, and other operators in the market can kind of push forward innovation maybe a little bit more if they understand it. Because historically, from a content perspective, this industry has been kind of ignored. Not content like hunting content. I'm talking about like this type of content. Like, hey, what do the financials look like? What is this industry? How are the inner workings? What are the rails like? All that. I don't think it's been talked about very much. So I appreciate you coming on. Where should people come and find you or the businesses you're working on? If you, I don't do any social media personally other than LinkedIn, but maybe your LinkedIn or other things like that.
Yeah, same with you. Just LinkedIn. I have a personal website too that I blog about different economic and finance things. It's just my name, dustywunderlich.com. Companies, publicsquare.com, and then GrabAGun.com as well are the two companies that I'm involved with, both great American companies and with bright futures. So, Nic, I'm glad you're doing this. Podcasters have really changed the direction of this country, and I truly believe that. So, I mean, good on you for getting content out there that's important to talk about in our industry, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Decentralized sources of knowledge, decentralized finance. We like decentralized stuff.
Yes, we do.
All right, man. Well, appreciate you hopping on.
Yeah, sounds good, buddy. Bye now.
See ya. Thanks again to Dusty for joining us today. If you're enjoying this series, be sure to check out the rest of the Outsides Insiders series episodes as they get released, where we bring you real, unfiltered conversations with the operators, founders, and insiders shaping the digital outdoor economy. And to all our listeners out there, if you enjoyed this episode, please do us a favor, hit the like button, subscribe to the podcast, and leave us a rating and review. It really helps us grow the show and keep bringing on great guests like Dusty. You can learn more about what Dusty's doing at Public Square by going to publicsquare.com. You can also visit GrabAGun.com, and you can follow Dusty on his LinkedIn to keep up with him and all of his commentary. We'll drop the links to these in the description. Follow the LandTrust Podcast on Instagram at LandTrust_hunting to stay up with up-to-date episodes as well as other content from the company. And you can also watch these episodes on YouTube. Just go to LandTrust channel. You can search LandTrust.com in YouTube and find our channel there. And if you haven't already, head to LandTrust.com, create your free account. It's whether you're looking to get out to hunt on your next hunting trip or fishing trip, or you're a landowner who's interested in hosting and generating some income from your land, it's totally free to join. Thanks for tuning in to the LandTrust Podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.